So good morning, and thank you for taking time out of your day here to take a deeper look at PDM Standard. The presentation today will last about 20-25 minutes, so half an hour overall for question and answer. And if we need more time for question and answer, I have time after as well to stay on board. But if you are limited on time, we figure 20-25 minutes or so we'll be able to get through the content. So start out here, just to introduce myself. My name is Jay Panero, and I am in the Rhode Island office of Fisher Unitech. Fisher Unitech covers 22 states. We're way out east. Um, so I have been in the SolidWorks reseller channel for 17 years at this point, which makes me an old timer. I started to list some of my certifications to fill out this slide, and you can see I got a couple of them in there, and then I just put ... So to make my qualifications plain and simple, without an alphabet soup of certifications, basically any mechanical tool set in SolidWorks I have been interacting with throughout the course of it for the most part. It's been 17 years, SolidWorks. 2001 plus on. I've basically been working with any mechanical tool set, including some of the ancillary products like inspection and composer. Simulation I wouldn't consider ancillary anymore, but it's built right in. But basically, until you get into electrical and PCB, I've touched it. All right. So this morning, this is our to-do list, our agenda. All right, we are going to take a look at a real-world example. Ringbrothers is actually a customer of ours, and my coworker Joe Frank actually helped set up their PDM system. They have been a wonderful partner to work with, and we're more than willing to share their workflow so we could show you guys some of the ways that they got the most out of PDM Standard. So we'll take a look at what their requirements were. Actually, let's take a step back. I'm going to show you one other thing here. All right, for those of you who went to the 2018 SolidWorks What's New events, or SolidWorks events to go through the new functionality, this assembly made its appearance in a few different spots. This is one of their Ringbrothers assemblies. This particular one is a hood hinge for a 1969 Camaro. They basically looked at the stock products that came out, 50 years ago. If you've ever opened up one of those old hoods, they are wobbly. They are very very unprecise. So they looked at that and said, well, let's make something that is precise, lightweight, and pretty darn good looking as far as hood hinges go. This is a pretty cool looking little example. All right, so they were nice enough to share this with SolidWorks Corporate, and since they are one of our customers, they were nice enough to share their PDM experience with you guys. All right, so we'll take a look at what their requirements were. We'll figure out how to build that in and what their revision schemes are. All right, and we'll take it step by step, basic building blocks to get the job done. And then, as time allows, I'll actually start running documents through the workflow to show you guys live what the results of the work are. So, I have been on countless PDM implementations, and one of the very first things we always do with a PDM implementation is we sit down in a room and we brainstorm what should the workflow look like. And to be honest with you, over the years, part of my challenge in those meetings is to kind of rein people in and say, well, what's realistic, what's going to work well. When you start documenting procedures that haven't been documented at companies before, you tend to get a lot of if-then scenarios. Well, if it's this, we do this, and if it's something different, we do this procedure instead. And there's a lot of tribal knowledge and not a lot of documentation, so we try not to end up with the spaghetti that you see here in front of you. I've never had one quite this bad. I've had some interesting ones, but this one is uh, the worst case scenario here. So what do we have for needs for this company? All right. So the first need, prototype workflow. All right. Prior to documents release, we need a way to capture um, a revision so that as prints are actually um, released to have prototype parts made, they actually have a stamp on them, so we know that this was pre-release Rev 01, pre-release Rev 02, so on and so forth. Once they are deemed fit for their purpose, we need a production workflow. Um, and it's more than just a notification that this part has now been released. There is actually a um, revision scheme change. All right, the numeric pre-release, the alpha release will be accounted for. This particular customer also does a ton of on-site machining, which is not always the case for a lot of my customers. A lot of my customers do the design work, and the CAM is either done by a completely different company, outside vendor, or at best, a lot of times it's actually done by a completely different department. In this case, the CAD and CAM release dates wanted to be, this customer wanted them worked into the workflow itself. All right. One of the things that a lot of people do forget when we start talking about PDM workflows is obsolete parts. All right. We want to be able to flag something as a non-usable part. And to make things even slightly more complicated, they wanted to have minor change loops. This request is actually relatively common in a lot of instances where they want to go from a Rev A to a Rev A1, Rev A2. Most of the times it's a note change on a drawing or a missing dimension or a typo. We just want to account for those changes to be had without having to go from a Rev A to a Rev B. So we want all of that, but we're in PDM Standard with these, what you might call limitations in PDM Standard. There's only one workflow in PDM Standard. To contrast that, there is PDM Professional, where there are an unlimited number of workflows. In PDM Standard, you can only have 10 different states maximum. And you can do a lot with those 10 states. That's what we're going to show you today. 10 is not really that small of a number, so we'll make the most out of that. We have some challenges where there's no automatic or parallel transitions. All right. I have some examples of PDM Pro to really show you why you'd even want those. The parallel transitions one is relatively easy to grasp because in a more complex approval process, you might want 2 or 3 people to approve things, but you don't want them to do it in serial. You want them to be able to do it parallel, so there's no bottlenecks or anything like that. The other challenge with PDM Standard is there's no dual transitions between states. So as I start to build this thing, I'll show you what that really means. All of these limitations, by the way, go away with PDM Pro, but we can do a lot just with PDM Standard. If you've never actually seen the two are actually identical interface, identical backend. So this is the basic building block. All right. Prior to a part being classified as released for production, we have a prototype workflow. So a work in process, a CAD release, and then a CAM release. For those of you who might not have done admin work on this in the past, the brown boxes here, the gray boxes, are states the document exists in, and the transitions here are just ways to go from state to state. I always call them bridges. So we need a bridge to go from one spot to another. Now the text that's in those boxes and the text that's in those transitions, completely customizable. So if you don't call it WIP and you call it draft, or you call it InDesign, or whatever you happen to call it, the text here completely inconsequential. It's all about the steps that make this up, and these were the steps that Ringbrothers needed to use. So basically a way to say that the CAD work is complete and a way to flag it as it's being developed for the CAM and toolpaths down there. So this was relatively simple. It has two different loops, so you get to a certain spot and you decide that something was wrong, you need to do a major change. There's two different avenues to come back up to here, up to the top, whip state, and bring it back down through the prototype release. So we can multiply that by 2. And if you've never done admin work, the copy-paste function when you're developing these workflows actually works really well. So you can get by with without having to redesign everything. All right, we have the exact same flow with just different titles on them for production. If there's ever any question about this, by the way, the different states have different permissions associated with them. So in a lot of instances, prototype parts are low visibility. If you're not inside the engineering or the CAM group in this case, it's very low visibility to the outside world. Production starts to bring up that visibility to non-engineering folks, those types of things. So these two mimic each other exactly. All right. Simple little bridge to go from prototype to production. Just one little transition to join the two together. Okay. Off to the side here, we will handle the obsolete state just by adding a state to hold the documents, and we'll have to build a couple little bridges to get from the other states into obsolescence. All right, so at least one little guy here from the release state to obsolete. A couple things about obsolete that obsolete has a option. All the states have an option built into it. When you flag a document as obsolete, it is basically archiving it. It is available perhaps for only managers or for only admin level. You can modify the permissions of that state, so basically it disappears from the vault itself, even though it's not really gone. One of the things I always try to impress upon people when we are developing these is try not to build dead ends. A lot of companies obsolete parts, and then 2 months later they realize, oh, that was actually a good part, but for a completely different assembly. So we build in a way out. All right, we can transition this thing back to, in this case, they did work in process, so we have reinstated the parts, basically. Same thing from the other side here. We have a way out from production release to obsolete. All right, so this answers the first challenge. We can have a prototype release with numeric, because as we start to develop these, we're using a numeric revision scheme, and we can have a alpha production. Now we have the extra challenge of a minor change loop. So off to the side here, we have a prototype minor change, where this is going to go from, in this case, it's actually 0101 to 0102, so on and so forth. So we need a few different transitions to come from the prototype to the prototype states to the prototype minor change states. All right. Now this is going to present a little bit of a challenge that I will describe to you in a minute, because if you're not careful, all right, we have a lot of arrows, a lot of different transitions here, and if we're not careful, we can send this thing the wrong direction. We will we'll address that in a second here. All right. To mimic this on the production side, all right, this is the exact same set of transitions in the very similar state, just with a production title using a alpha revision scheme. In total, this is 9 states. All right. This is actually perfect. We have an extra state at our disposal in case we want to have like a purchase parts state where there's no rev control on a purchase parts state. It just kind of gets locked in place. We could add something like that in. We didn't max this thing out, but we have a ton of functionality built into this thing. All right, so there's some nitty-gritty details that actually make this thing work. All right, in the revision, we have 4 different components that comprise 2 different revision schemes, which is actually a limitation built into PDM Standard. It's a worthwhile limitation. Since we only have one workflow with 10 states, I've never actually needed more than 2 revision schemes to do my job. But it is actually a programmed in limit. But we're able to account for everything we need to here with those 2. All right, so these red stars indicate transitions that'll actually stamp a revision. So I won't point them all out to you, but obviously when you go from WIP to prototype CAD release, we want to stamp that as Rev 01. When it comes through to a minor change, that 01 should go to a 0101, so on and so forth, until it actually comes through a major change, which would actually change it to Rev 02, or it gets sent to production where it becomes a Rev A. There are a number of instances where we'll have to reset revisions, so we need a couple of reset options built into some of these transitions. That I will actually show you in the admin tool where the reset button actually is. Quite simple little tick box there. All right, so now let's go ahead and test this thing out. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pop into Windows Explorer. I'll do most of my work here from Windows Explorer. All right, I have a ton of vaults on my computer because of who I am and what I do. So today I will be using the webcast demo vault here. And in here I have a number of components that have been checked in. You can see I copied them into the vault. They are checked in the very first time they're in prototype WIP. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll take a small assembly here just to give you an idea if you've ever taken the drawings class. This is the assembly that we're playing with today, this little scuba air source assembly here. It actually has, it's one of the best assemblies in all of SOLIDWORKS training because most of the assemblies that they use in SOLIDWORKS training are kind of simplistic. This one's actually pretty nice. So I'll take this guy here. I'll do a right click. I'll do a change state. From the work in process state, we only have one, so one option. We'll send it to a CAD release. All right, and I'll grab all the components that go with it in this particular case. And when I look at the data card for this thing, all right, it's stamped Rev 0101. All right, if I take this thing here and I run this through a minor change, all right, and I know you would never take everything and just shove everything through all these changes, but that's the benefit of being a demo person here. We don't have to worry about just taking the entire assembly and throwing it through. So it went into the minor change state. They could be checked out, worked on, and when we send it back to CAD release, it's going to get stamped as a Rev 0101. You can see that there on the data card. Now, what I didn't show you is we sent it from CAD release to prototype change. If we want to send it to CAM release, we want it to cross this bridge right here. We don't want it to accidentally come from here and then get sent down here, but there's enough transitions that actually could happen. So built into this thing is a check valve, so to speak. If I change the state and I send it for another minor change, hidden on the background of this data card is this little variable here. And my coworker built this, and he's got a sense of humor, so he called it Watchdog. All right. In the admin tool, we actually put in a check valve, so to speak, a safety net, where we're looking at that variable, and we're saying, like, if you have the wrong variable, you can only go one way. All right. So if you come from CAD and you end up here, you can see how it writes CAD. And if it doesn't say CAD, it's not going to go down through here. It's going to come through it's only going to be able to go back through here. So if I were to try to transition this thing the wrong way, if I were to try to send it to cam, all right, tells me right here, no, you're going the wrong direction. It's actually going to stop the action from happening. All right, so there's some nice protections that can be built in. But just to blast this thing through, let's send it back to CAD. All right, and then I'll push it forward to cam release. Right, this particular customer didn't want to have a bump rev there, but when we actually send this thing to the production workflow rather, and we do a CAD release from the production, it stamps it as Rev A, and it resets the 02 to a 00. Okay, so basically, these states are designed to work with the alpha revision scheme, all right? And then these transitions are designed to bump or reset the appropriate revision component to get the job done. All right, down here we have the same safeguards that are built in. All right, so this guy here, not that guy. Let's go back to this guy. All right, when the document crosses this bridge, all right, and this is the same for the prototype side on that side. What it does is it writes that safeguard. It writes that variable called watchdog. And then on this side here, on a condition, it's actually verifying it has the right text in that watchdog variable. And that's how that all works. For a, not that guy. For the reset, there is a very simple, we tell it to write revision components. We tell it to increment the revision counter. And over here, we have the ability to go ahead and reset variables. So increment by and reset. And that's where it gets the information about what to do when we trigger that bump rev. All right. So it is pretty darn comprehensive for a standard workflow. All right, and it's making use of 9 out of the 10 states. It's making use out of everything that this particular customer needed, including the minor change loop. And if we decide to obsolete this thing, all right, we can obsolete it. Now, if you've never done admin work on this, every one of these transitions and every one of these states can have different permissions. So not everybody should be able to do everything, and not everybody should be able to read or write in every location that the document exists in, but those are all properties of the state where we can determine what group can do what and when. All right. So the standard product was able to account for everything that the customer needed. And like I say, this is a real-world example. Ringbrothers was implemented by my coworker who developed this particular presentation. So this was, it's nice. It's not not a off-the-cuff sort of example. This is actually was based right off of their existing vault. All right, so that brings us. See, I get long-winded. I start talking, I get excited about this stuff, and then I just keep talking and talking. But from a content perspective, all right, that is a basic overview of what we had planned to present today. Before I go into questions and answer, which I'm more than willing to do. The end of the quarter is near, and when that happens, SolidWorks Corporate loves to give out nice little discounts. So if you were in the market for any CAD, we have a buy one, get one half off, which is a pretty darn good deal. Um, SolidWorks PDM, SolidWorks PDM. How about SolidWorks Professional and SolidWorks Premium? Both come with PDM Standard that we were just talking about, so that could be included as well. All right. We also have internally, not from SolidWorks Corporate, Fisher Unitech does all of our training here. We have a buy one training class, get one 50% off as well. Okay, so I know I talked a little bit longer than I had planned for. I have plenty of time to answer questions. I don't have anything scheduled right after this, so I will stick around to answer questions. If you have questions, there is a Q&A box in your WebEx controls. I will try to get to them as fast as I can. I know that sometimes people are shy. They don't want to ask questions. Guess what? Nobody's going to know who you are. I will not announce your name, so there is no such thing as a stupid question. They're just innocent questions, even if they are lower level questions. Not to fear. Actually, I should forward this one. Not to fear. We'll just go ahead and all right, so the first question is actually about licensing. Can you add seats of PDM Standard, or do you have to buy a new seat of SolidWorks? From a licensing standpoint, PDM comes with SolidWorks Professional or SolidWorks Premium, as I mentioned. SolidWorks Standard, to get to PDM, what you can actually do is take any SolidWorks Standard seat and upgrade it to SolidWorks Professional. The PDM piece, to the best of my knowledge, is no longer available as a standalone. Not for the CAD. Now, I'm going to go a little bit. This might get a little bit messy on the screen since I wasn't planning on showing this, but I have. Actually, I'll just go through it verbally just so it doesn't look so bad. There are actually 3 different levels of PDM. Now, this is where SolidWorks Corporate gets a little repetitive with how they describe their products. Basically, everything in the SolidWorks arena has a standard, professional, and premium. But the 3 licenses of SolidWorks PDM take on PDM CAD Editor, which is the piece of PDM that's built into SolidWorks Professional and SolidWorks Premium. It gives you all the PDM functionality, including all the SolidWorks add-ins. Everything works from inside of SolidWorks. There is a lot of value to PDM even outside of CAD, so there is something called a PDM contributor, which gives you complete access to PDM, but does not give you the SolidWorks add-in. That is actually able to be purchased on its own. So unfortunately for the person who asked the question, it sounds like they want PDM Standard for a SolidWorks user, and the most cost-effective way to get that done is to actually upgrade a SolidWorks Standard seat to SolidWorks Professional. Just because it's always a question that comes up, there is a 3rd level of PDM, which is PDM Viewer, which is actually available in a 5-pack. It's relatively cost-effective. If you have a number of non-engineering people who need to get in and search, view, or print, we have search, view, print, or approve. We have a viewer pack for that, so they can do that. Okay, so I have a very specific question, and I'm glad it actually got brought up. What does the green flag in the obsolete state mean? Excellent question, and I said I wouldn't mention names, so I won't mention names. Ignore permissions in previous states actually makes that green flag come in, and I use that for obsolete for sure. Now, just to get a little bit deep, a little bit nitty-gritty, The obsolete state is really just the state. The fact that it says obsolete doesn't mean anything. So let's think about this for a second. I'm actually going to go to a different workflow, one that makes it a little bit easier to see. Let's go to this guy. Let's go to this guy. Okay. Documents that are sitting in released. When engineers take a document from released and they require a change, it ends up down here. So engineers uh, can see the latest and greatest and edit the latest and greatest. Well, let's say that version 4 was Rev A. Engineers are working towards version 5, version 6. They're working towards Rev B, but Rev A is still an approved print. So viewers that come in can still access the document version 4, Rev A released. When, let's say, version 6 gets approved as Rev B, viewers can actually review version 6 Rev B. For obsolete, we don't want that to happen. What we want is we want somebody like an admin or a manager to come in and say, let's obsolete this file. And they don't, so basically version 4 Rev A is released. Version 5 is the obsolete version. We want version 4 to disappear. We want the whole entire part number to disappear. So what this does is it applies this level of permissions from this state to every version of the document. So viewers would just see the part disappear. Um, Actually, is this set up that way? This is actually set up that way, but I don't actually have a viewer group in here, which is appropriate because they would have 0 permissions in this state, which is what would make it disappear, not even read permissions. Okay. Will this presentation be available in the future? This is actually recorded, which is wonderful. So all my ums and stutters will be part of the presentation forever now. I'm not actually sure how long it will remain, but we can definitely get you some information about the um, location of this recording. Absolutely. Can PDM control drawing revisions? If so, does it update the revision boxes automatically in the drawing? I'm going to say yes, absolutely. Make sure you're on at least PDM 2018. PDM 2018 has some extra functionality where we can actually write to the standard SOLIDWORKS Rev table, which I know it sounds surprising, but in 2017, PDM, even PDM Professional, could not actually write to. Oh, my Rev table's gone. Where's my Rev table? All right, so what happens is when this is all working correctly, the document is in a pre-release state. The engineer would come in here and add a revision row. The revision would actually say asterisk or some sort of placeholder because it's never actually been approved yet. And this revision would mimic it. As the document gets approved, it gets stamped Rev A. PDM actually comes in, changes the asterisk to an A, puts in the person's initials and the date of when it's done. In an ideal world, the person who asked this question, nobody in PDM is ever writing to this or this column manually. The description, you need to write that manually. That's definitely something that just gets typed in. But the Rev date approval, I also have an example somewhere in my vault with the ECN number. That type of stuff, we want to have that be automatically done. And that can definitely happen. Another question about the presentation being available. If I open SOLIDWORKS, can I have a viewer look at files or release the part while I have SOLIDWORKS open? That sounds, to the person who asked this question, who I actually think I've met before, that sounds like you want the person to look over your shoulder while you're here. The answer is you could do that, but you would have to log off as you and log in as them to do it. Honestly, it would be cheaper and more effective even to just have a single contributor license, which is relatively inexpensive. They all float. All the licenses float. So that person could grab a contributor license, use it for 20 minutes to review a drawing and approve it, and then release the contributor license. Um, the Even if you have SolidWorks CAD as a standalone license that is, locked activated to a machine, the PDM piece of it is actually floating. So what the first thing we do when we implement PDM is install a network license manager and send it on its way. Next question is how many hours to set up PDM workflow? Can it be set up by a CAD user or do you need an expert? Um, Hours differ. The um, options that are chosen and the testing that has to be done would make it differ. A lot of times with PDM Standard, the entire implementation is somewhere between 20 and 30 hours. It depends on some of the options that are there. A lot of it, surprisingly, does also depend on how complex you want this data card to be. This data card is wonderful. Basically, anything I ever want to automatically fill out the title block, or anything I ever want to fill out a bill of material, or anything I want to search on, I build into this data card, and I can do all those three things very quickly and easily. Some companies, there's 20 or 30 extra fields that they want to put into this data card. Um, we absolutely recommend um, having Fisher Unitech do it, and I know that sounds like a sales pitch, but I'm going to give you the reason why. We're all SolidWorks users. The very first time you ever modeled a SolidWorks part, you probably got the job done, and you looked at the model and said, I will never build it that way again. What you have at your advantage with Fisher Unitech PDM implementation team is we know where all the landmines are, we know where all the trouble spots are. We've built enough vaults that we know that yeah, it can do this, but that's not a good idea, and here's why. So you don't necessarily need to be an expert, but one of the things that even the PDM training manual recommends is try to get it right the first time. It will be a lot easier down the road. All right. Do, 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 do. What is the viewer path? Actually, the viewer path is identical to what you see right here. As a viewer, you would also have a Blueberry in your, a local view in your on your C drive. You would click in here, and you would actually log in, and your credentials would only give you, search, view, print, those types of things. What do you need to use? What do you need to use PDM with SolidWorks Premium 2017? Um, I said I would not name names, but I will stick with that. The answer to that is server hardware. Um, I am a standalone unit, so I actually have one laptop that acts as both the server side and the client side. Obviously, on the production environment, you would never want that to be the case. Everything that runs on the server is actually provided by SolidWorks, so there's no licensing for anything on the server. It runs off of SQL Express, which is actually a Microsoft product, and a couple other applications get installed. So the only thing you would need to run PDM with SolidWorks Premium 2017 is some server hardware to do it. Um, Follow-up question to the licensing question. If you only have one license, what can you do? I'm going to give you a workaround that will become painful eventually, but with a single seat of SolidWorks and PDM installed, if you want non-SolidWorks people to get in, means you have to log out frequently. Now, you can do that. You can actually have SolidWorks fired up. You can check out a document to use, so you can edit it, and you can log out. The reason why that would become painful is because this version of PDM does a wonderful job handling library files. All right, so like I said, I am a one-man show, but I have actually downloaded. I don't want a ton of McMaster parts, really. I actually have a very big library that I use pretty frequently. And it's housed in PDM because once you're in PDM, I always tell people if you're in PDM, be 100% in PDM. This library, you can see from the icon and the green folders, is PDM. And if I need to have, if I want to put a, not a PCB, how about a rod end? If I want to put one of these library files in my assembly here, I don't want to have to log out of PDM or be um, be prevented from accessing my library because some other viewer is going in to search view or print. So for the person who asked, yes, you can check out a document, you can log out, and then free up your license for a viewer. But I think you'd find it's just it's worth the very small cost to get a contributor license to float around for those viewer people. But if you're doing a testing environment and you're going to develop the vault and get it up and running, the login log out will be perfectly fine for testing purposes and proof of concept for sure. All right. From what I can read, I haven't actually skipped anything. Um, so the question answer is still open. Where can I find the PDM training manual? I'll tell you this: the PDM training manual on the admin side, unfortunately, SOLIDWORKS Corporate um, doesn't make those available electronically yet. They are available through Fisher Unitech. We can buy them from SolidWorks. We can get them to you. Um, the one thing that I will say about PDM is when you install it, it installs this admin guide. This is actually a very comprehensive guide. Now, the PDM training manual is told from a um, storyline. All SolidWorks training is you basically they're storyline based. So we're going to learn, we're going to model this, and along the way we're going to learn a little bit about a couple of tools. It's never SolidWorks training is almost never tool based, where you go in and you learn everything you possibly could about extrusions because when you do that, the features aren't put in context and it doesn't sink in as well. The PDM training manual for the admins is storyline based. We're going to create a vault for the Acme company. They design grills. We're gonna go along and learn a little bit about everything we need to do to get the job done. This administration guide is tool based. It's deep. Um, it is everything you want to know about you know users and groups. It doesn't guide you click for click. If you had a sense of what you needed to get done, this is a great resource for you. Otherwise, we provide both PDM training, um, which is done in an online form. So we have a live trainer. We have a limited number of students. You'll actually log in and use one of the Fisher Unitech licenses that's available. Um, so the SolidWorks corporate tries to stop us from actually selling manuals outright without doing a training class. So this is without doing any sort of purchasing or anything like that. This is the 500 and some odd page resource that I can give you, and it's installed when you install the product. Okay, I had come over to here for a second to discuss our links. All right, so we have a YouTube channel, which I've been informed that today's presentation is going to end up on our YouTube channel. It'll also end up on our website, and that'll be interesting. This might be my first YouTube video ever. We have a blog through our website as well that will be a good resource for you for little tips and tricks and tidbits along the way as well. So be sure to follow us on social media. Hopefully we can get everything you need to know about SolidWorks to you guys in a nice platform. Okay. I'll leave this up. The next slide is actually just the Fisher Unitech logo, so I'll leave this slide up here. I will leave the Q&A open for a little bit. I might mute myself because it looks like the questions have kind of filtered down or stopped coming in. But I am still here, and if I do get another question, I'll unmute myself and answer it. But I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to come out and view this PDM standard presentation. Thank you.